The following is a hockey podcast out of Vancouver and Surrey, British Columbia. It'll only consist of a lot of puck talk and even more BS, or in actual words, banter and satire. Enjoy, and as always, go Canucks go.
Elias Pettersson's future is foggier than my brain function. Well, guess what? Things might have gotten even a little bit foggier now that Patrik Allvin has given Elias Pettersson an ultimatum.
You're Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Locked On Canucks. My name is Trevor Beggs, co-host of Locked On Canucks and also a Canucks writer currently with Daily Hot, baby. Before we dive into the episode, we got to thank you and you for tuning in to Locked On Canucks because it is your Canucks every damn day. And we're not here without you tuning in. And we're also not here without those sponsors, baby, giving us the tens of dollars. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Who knows what kind of bet to place on the future of Elias Pettersson in Vancouver right now? A lot of the fan base want him gone. A lot of the fan base is saying, buy the dip. He's going to bounce back. But what's actually going to happen with Elias Pettersson is so firmly up in the air. But it took another turn yesterday with comments from Patrik Allvin about the future of Elias Pettersson in Vancouver. Let's touch on that to kick off the show. We'll also get into the latest on Brock Boeser. Reports came out in terms of what the Canucks offer Brock Boeser in terms of his last contract, in terms of them trying to keep him around. Also comments from Elliotte Friedman as well about how Brock Boeser is feeling about this whole situation. And finally, are the Canucks actually making the right call in letting Brock Boeser walk in light of other contracts they've signed over the past few months? We'll also get into news and notes as well regarding the St. Louis Blues, D-Petey, Reefer Sherwood, the weekend ahead, and more here on Locked On Canucks. But let's kick it off by talking about Elias Pettersson. And man, oh man, I don't want to put a dark cloud over your head right now because the sun is shining outside, baby. Okay, go enjoy that sunshine. Take us here on Locked On Canucks. Go on a walk. Don't be like Kyle Bowen. Don't be depressed about the Canucks missing the playoffs because, hey, it is what it is, man. I'm buying the dip. This team is bouncing back next season. But are they bouncing back with Elias Pettersson? Of course, the main story with Elias Pettersson this season has been the feud with JT Miller. But I'd say a pretty big secondary story would be the fact that this guy did not come to camp in shape. Reports suggest that Elias Pettersson had some of the worst fitness testing in camp when the Canucks season started this year. And we all believe that it led to JT Miller being on his case, Canucks management being on his case. And look, Pettersson's agent has come out and said that it was due to the tendonitis and he wasn't able to train properly because of injury. That's fair to an extent. But Pettersson himself came out in the fall and said that he was healthy and ready to go. So the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, but the fact of the matter is, Elias Pettersson, one of the highest paid players in the NHL, came into camp in some of the worst shape on the team to begin the season for your Vancouver Canucks. And because of this, Patrik Allvin has laid out an ultimatum. Now, Ian McIntyre, the GOAT of Canucks media right now, he's been dropping the truth bombs lately. And he has this quote recently from Patrik Allvin speaking about Elias Pettersson's plans heading into the summer. And Patrik Allvin has said he hopes that he remains in Vancouver. Patrik Allvin has said, quote, "That's something we're obviously going to talk about here when the season is over regarding him staying in Vancouver. And we want to have a plan for it. We have the right resources here to help him. Listen, he has the ability to dictate the future, and I'm sure he wants to come back to his normal form and wants to continue to grow and get better. So we absolutely have the commitment and resources here to help him with that." Now, I got to say, this is a bit of a bizarre situation. Not the fact that Patrik Allvin wants Elias Pettersson to stay in Vancouver based on what happened. I'm talking about the fact that it kind of sounds like they are babysitting their $11.6 million player. The guy that they tied this franchise to for the next 8 years and 7 years after this season. This is the kind of guy that you want to be self-motivated. The Canucks aren't going out there and babysitting Quinn Hughes this offseason. They trust him fully to get into form, to train properly, to be ready to help this Vancouver Canucks team compete for the Stanley Cup next season. But it's pretty damn clear that they don't have that same confidence in Elias Pettersson. And hit me up in the comments if you have any other insights. I was doing some research for the show this morning, and I can't find other instances like this where a top player from an organization has been asked to stay in Vancouver or just stay in the city where they play and train for most of the offseason. Now, look, all these stars, they're entitled to their vacation. You got to take it, especially when you've been eliminated from the playoffs. But most of these guys, they go home and they come back in, August, maybe even early September and get ready from training camp from there. But the Canucks have put a massive, massive investment into Elias Pettersson. And quite honestly, the future of the Vancouver Canucks, it completely hinges on Elias Pettersson. Whether they decide to retain him or whether they decide to trade him. And when I talk about these quotes from Patrik Allvin being an ultimatum, here's why. If Pettersson decides to balk at staying in Vancouver over the summer, a place where, the vibes haven't been great for him over the past 8 to 9 months, if he balks at that, you got to think that increases the likelihood that the Vancouver Canucks decide to deal him this offseason. And what a departure that would be for the Vancouver Canucks. I mean, hell, we're looking at a player here, and I pulled up the stats recently for an article coming out on Daily Hive. From the beginning of Rick Tocchet's tenure to the end of January of 2024, Elias Pettersson had 112 points and 47 goals in 85 games. That was good for the 7th best mark in the entire NHL. And look, we talk about him being a point per game player through his first 400 games, I should say. But he was more than that. I mean, over his first 400 games, he was around the 22nd highest scoring forward in the NHL. But from the time Tocchet took over to the end of January last year, we're talking about the 7th highest scoring forward in the NHL. But since the end of January of 2024, Elias Pettersson has 22 goals and 70 points in 97 games. That is the 122nd best mark in the NHL. So Canucks fans, I know you guys are split, but let me know. Are you believing Elias Pettersson is closer to superstar level top 10 scorer? Or is he closer to the Philip Deneau, Uri Slavkovsky, Bo Horvat tier of players in terms of scoring where he's been over the past 97 regular season games and 13 playoff games as well? Again, I'm curious to see what we hear from Pettersson as the media availability ends. Curious to see what Allvin says when he talks to the media. It's always a bit more of a hostile environment. But hopefully we'll get some insight. Is Pettersson going to stick around in Vancouver this offseason? Hey, maybe a summer in Vancouver is good for Petey. We saw this guy taking the scooter to the rink ahead of the playoff games last season. Vancouver, come on. We know the West Coast buys, baby. One of the most beautiful cities in the world. But again, I wonder how Elias Pettersson feels about more or less being babysat by the organization. Yeah, the same organization that, more or less pressured him into signing that contract too. Not that I'm feeling bad for the guy making 11.6, but we all know the reports, right? The threat of trading him to Carolina to get him to sign pen to paper before the season ended. There has been a lot of ups and downs for Elias Pettersson here in Vancouver, and this might just be the final straw. If Pettersson says no to training in Vancouver, you got to think this management team takes a long and hard look at trading him this offseason. And I talked about potential trades for Elias Pettersson. Go check that out on our podcast and YouTube feed. We'll revamp that here as we get deeper into the offseason. But I do think that if he decides not to stay in Vancouver, he is likely, not just possibly, but I'll say likely to be traded this summer. fascinating times ahead for Elias Pettersson and the Vancouver Canucks. And especially now that, look, we all thought that Elias Pettersson and Brock Boeser, two franchise pillars. Remember the future is here comment from John Shorthouse with Quinn Hughes, Brock Boeser, and Elias Pettersson on the ice in overtime 6, almost 7 years ago now. Now Elias Pettersson and Brock Boeser could both be gone by the time next season rolls around. So we got more into the Brock Boeser report yesterday. Let's touch on it more on the other side, including what the Canucks last offered Brock Boeser, what Elliotte Friedman's saying about Brock Boeser, and are the Canucks actually making the right move in terms of letting Brock Boeser walk in free agency? You're listening to Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every damn day. We'll be back on the other side after shouting at our friends over at FanDuel. You know, I can't say I'm the smartest guy when it comes to betting on sports or in general. Like I said, my brain, it's foggier than Elias Pettersson's future. But I do know that when I take this dumb brain of mine and I go bet on sports, that I go use FanDuel, baby. And guess what? For Canucks fans, of course, they're not in the playoffs, but one way to make the NHL playoffs a little more exciting is by using FanDuel. And FanDuel right now, they're giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. And, you know, I'm a hockey nerd to the core, and there's some pretty fun matchups coming up. You know, Colorado and Dallas, they seem locked in to meet each other. Could the Minnesota, what? Talk about a dumb brain. Could the Winnipeg Jets meet the Minnesota Wild? Their closest geographic rival, right? They are to the Kraken. They're to the Crackin Canucks. Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. And again, you look at the East, Toronto, Ottawa, Washington, Montreal. Like I'm loving the playoff match. Okay, hockey nerd to the core. And if I'm making those bets, you know I'm placing them on FanDuel right now. Again, new customers get $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. We're back here on Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every damn day. And man, oh man, I keep saying we. Because, you know, I'm not here without guys like Kyle Bowen, founder of the show, and Nick Bondi. But I am here by myself on the program today. But we keep chugging along here on Locked On Canucks. You know, I know the same basketball, but, you know, sometimes you got to do things by yourself. And that's what we're doing here on Locked On Canucks. Did have a great chat with Patrik Johnson earlier this week. If you missed that episode, go check out the episode called What the Hell Happened to the Vancouver Canucks with some great insights from Patrik Johnson. And man, oh man, as the Canucks have been out of the playoffs, the news continues to break. And we learned yesterday that Brock Boeser is unlikely to stay in Vancouver. And Elias Pettersson, Elliotte Friedman came out on the 32 Thoughts podcast today and said that he believes that Brock Boeser is heartbroken over this decision. And I know what you may be thinking. It's how bad do you feel for a bunch of millionaires? But God, come on, these guys are human, okay? Brock Boeser, good guy, Brock Boeser, good guy in the room. You know, seems to be a calming presence in that room sometimes. But, you know, it's clear that he has struggled on and off, much like Elias Pettersson has, to a different extent, based on extenuating circumstances, whether it was, you know, the passing of his father, the trade request, rescinding the trade request, possibly being dealt at this deadline. You do start to wonder when you hear those kind of things from Brock Boeser if he is better suited playing in a smaller market. And the same can be said with a lot of teams, right? Or a lot of players, I should say. Because you look at Canada not winning the Cup since 1993, and I don't think that's all a fluke. Of course, there's some bad luck there, but there's a lot more pressure playing in the Canadian market, especially when you live in this world of, you know, connecting to the rest of the world via the internet or your phone all the time. And it is starting to feel like Brock Boeser might be better suited playing in another market, even if you're hearing him right now say that he's heartbroken and that he does want to stay. But look, if he does want to stay, the Canucks did offer him a contract, right? And Rick Dhaliwal reported this before. He said it again today on local radio The Canucks' last offer to Brock Boeser was a 5-year deal, paying him $40 million overall, so $8 million per season. Now, of course, that's the average annual value we've kind of thought that Brock Boeser may sign at, right? Based on the 40 goals last year, but more so based on the fact that he has scored at 30 goals and 65-point pace throughout his near decade-long NHL career now. That's a decent amount of time for Brock Boeser. And again, makes it sound very weird that the team is still evaluating him. And we all know, I think that's a bit of a facade and that they likely want to move in a different direction. But if the reporting from Rick was true, that's not that the Canucks are just giving up on this guy. If that was the case, maybe they would have just traded him at the deadline for a second-round pick. But Brock Boeser, again, has said himself he's unlikely to return. And again, not like the Canucks didn't offer him a contract. 5 years at $40 million for Brock. I'm curious, Canuck fans, would you be okay with that? Clearly, Brock Boeser and his agent aren't okay with that. But as Canuck fans, would you be okay seeing Brock Boeser at a deal paying him 5 years at $40 million a season? Of course, you look at the offseason, and look, if the Canucks did re-sign Brock Boeser, that is pretty much the one big move they can make without subtracting from the rest of the roster. You got about, call it $15 million in cap space. You resign Brock to $8 million, and you got $7 million left to really fill the fringes of your roster. Like, you could theoretically do Boeser, Suter, and then sign some depth pieces and be capped out. But we all know that this team after this season, there's no way they can do that and sell it to this fan base. And look, Brock Boeser, he is chasing, reportedly, about $56 million in free agency. Like, he's looking for that 7, even an 8-year deal, if it is with the Vancouver Canucks. And again, you look at that $8 million average annual value. That's what we always think about as fans. But Brock Boeser, I'm sure he wants to go out and get paid $56 million. And likely keep more in his pocket if he plays for another team in another state. And you do start to wonder here with Brock Boeser. Again, we played the Minnesota Wild on Saturday night. If this is a new showcase for his hometown team. Because again, Brock Boeser, he's from Minnesota. The Minnesota Wild are going to have a swath of cap space opening up with the Parise and Suter bios ending. They need scoring. It does seem like a pretty good fit aside from just the hometown aspect for Brock Boeser. But the other thing I'm thinking about here too about is letting Boeser go the right call. And I'll get to some of your comments here because I see some of you weighing in about that. I see the argument that you want to move in a different direction based on the fact that Brock Boeser is going to command, let's say, $7 million plus. He's not the quickest skater in the world. And he's been around for a long time in the city and not had a ton of success in terms of helping this team get to the playoffs. Now, I think that's a bit short-sighted because he was good in the playoffs, and it's not his fault that Jim Benning absolutely wrecked this team during most of his career here. But that being said, I'm starting to look at the bigger picture now, and you look what the Canucks have done recently. Ironically, after that JT Miller trade, they take that first from Pittsburgh, they offload a couple more contracts, they acquire Marcus Pettersson and Drew O'Connor. They signed Drew O'Connor to a 2-year deal, paying him $2.5 million. They signed Marcus Pettersson to a 6-year deal, paying him $5.5 million. What does that number equal? $8 million. Are you more comfortable? What do you feel better about, Canucks fans? Are you more comfortable with Marcus Pettersson and Drew O'Connor on your team making $8 million? Or would you rather have Brock Boeser on your team making $8 million? Might I remind you, you would also have another first-round pick in there and potentially a 2026 unprotected first-round pick. So I'm not saying that it's absolutely the wrong call to let Brock Boeser walk. But when I look at that, I would rather have Brock Boeser and the 2026 unprotected first-round pick rather than Marcus Pettersson and Drew O'Connor. And that is not a bold take to say. And I think that's worth bringing up because there's a lot of rhetoric in this market about Brock Boeser and let him walk. It's time to let him go, blah, blah, blah. But I think Canucks management does have to come under some fire here. They traded a first-round pick away, brought in Marcus Pettersson and Drew O'Connor. They're letting Brock Boeser walk for free when they should have at least traded him for an asset. There's just something off with the Canucks management right now. It's it's time to start questioning what is going on with this management team. And look, we say every offseason is a huge offseason, but this one really seems to have some heat to it in terms of letting Boeser potentially walk for free and the possibility of trading Elias Pettersson as well. Let me know in the comments. Again, would you prefer Marcus Pettersson to Drew O'Connor at $8 million? Or would you prefer Brock Boeser at $8 million with a 2026 first-round pick? Man, oh man, not to go dark on you Canuck fans. Remember, the sun is shining, and it's all good. The Canucks, they're going to win a cup in the Locked On Canucks era, baby. Let's go. Let's cut to break, get some other news notes on the other side. I want to talk a bit about the St. Louis Blues, some of the depth guys, and get some of your comments here on Locked On Canucks. We'll be back on the other side after showing it our friends over at longtime friends over at Gametime. All right, so Canucks tickets. Yeah, I guess they got 3 home games left, and you might find a discount. But the best discount you're going to find if you want to spend that money, why would you want to do that? But if you want to spend that money, go check out Gametime, okay? Because remember, Gametime, they got the lowest price guarantee, baby. So if you want to find last-minute tickets, you know the lowest prices you're going to find are on Gametime. And yeah, you know, if you find tickets cheaper for elsewhere on another app, Gametime will credit you with 110% of the difference. They got your back, baby. They got your back more than the management team of the Vancouver Canucks. Unbelievable, man. What is happening here in Vancouver? But on Gametime, again, last-minute tickets, it's easier than ever to score them on Gametime. And the prices on the Gametime app, they actually drop as the event gets closer. And with their all-in pricing, you can see the total cost up front. So there's no surprises at checkout. And the lowest price guarantee means you never have to worry about overpaying. Unless you go see the Canucks team that is out of the playoffs. But hey, D-Petey, Ratu, Boom Bam, Sherwood, there's reasons to go watch this team still. Come on. So make sure whatever you're buying, Canucks tickets or whatever it is, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Go download that Gametime app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets. Lowest prices. Guaranteed. All right, we're back here on Locked On Canucks. Your Canucks every damn day. Although maybe not the weekends, baby. We'll see. I mean, Kyle Bowen, I heard he bought a house, and then I saw a photo, and I saw that was a bunch of sticks and rocks. So, Kyle, are you okay, buddy? Kyle, reach out to us here. Reach out to the good people Locked On Canucks. Join the Discord if you haven't already. I'll put the link for that in today's episode as well. It's where the best Canuck fans in the world talk about Canucks and whatever else on the toilet. Kyle Bowen may pop his head into there as well. Let's get to some news and notes before I get to some of your comments here on Locked On Canucks. One thing I want to touch on, and look, there's been so much negativity about the Vancouver Canucks and missing the playoffs, and I completely get it. I completely get it. This team, it was supposed to be a Stanley Cup contender. They're going to miss the playoffs. But I think one piece of solace we can take is that one thing that was out of their control was the St. Louis Blues and their crazy turnaround. Now, Dom Lucian from The Athletic had an article about this morning. The St. Louis Blues, according to his model, say what you want about the model, their odds for them making the playoffs at the Four Nations break was 1.1%. He admits maybe the model is too low, but call it 5 to 10%. But the St. Louis Blues basically had to play at 150 and 120 point pace. And guess what? They've gone 18-3-2 since the end of the Four Nations and 13-2-1 without Colton Parayko in the lineup. Of course, Jim Montgomery has turned that team around. Robert Thomas doing what we thought Elias Pettersson would do. He's got 34 points in 24 games. So, I mean, look, the Canucks couldn't control the St. Louis Blues playing like they're the 1992 Pittsburgh Penguins here, okay? So, sometimes things are just out of your control, okay? And one thing that's going to make you happier in life, come on, meditate with me here, is don't stress about the things you can't control. Let's talk for a couple minutes about the Canucks last night against the Colorado Avalanche. A 4-1 win over the Colorado Avalanche. I know what you're all thinking. Of course they win now. But to be honest, I think a lot of Canuck fans are like, yeah, they always win when they're out of the playoffs. This year's a bit different, right? Like, what are they going to do? Fall from 15th to 13th at best? At best? Get over the loser mentality and just enjoy the Canucks winning some hockey games. That's all I got to say. Sports is supposed to be fun. And look, you're seeing different players step up for this team. I mean, how crazy is it that this team has scored 34 goals in 9 games with Elias Pettersson out of the lineup? Does this team even need Elias Pettersson? Come on. No, of course they need some more help offensively. They're on a bit of a shooting heater right now, but they have been generating more. And they've done it because of guys like Kiefer Sherwood, Dakota Joshua, Atu Ratu. And man, oh man, speaking of those guys, that could be a pretty intriguing looking third line for the Vancouver Canucks heading into the next season. If Atu Ratu takes a step, Dakota Joshua gets back to his old form, and Kiefer Sherwood just keeps doing Reefer Sherwood type things. That could be a hell of a line to watch when the Canucks make the 2026 playoffs. So all those guys doing it right now. Another guy who's doing it is D-Petey. 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 And man, oh man, stepping up in the scrap last night. The physical hit on Logan O'Connor. Standing over him, saying, "Who's your daddy?" And then scrapping with the guy. And what he told Sportsnet after the game was his first fight ever. No street fights, no bar fights, no fights at any other level of hockey. That was his first fight last night. And he held it pretty damn well, even though it looked like he was rocking a pretty decent mark on his forehead after that scrap. Look, D-Petey has immediately become a fan favorite. And what is one of the weirdest stories for the Vancouver Canucks right now, the fact that superstar Elias Pettersson has drawn the ire of so many fans of this market, whereas the other Elias Pettersson, is now a fan favorite in this market. Figure that one out, man. Shit is weird here on the West Coast. That is for certain. And I think the last note from last night's game is, how good does Kevin Lankinen look when he gets a bit of rest, right? The guy has not been himself since the Four Nations. He had a bit of a hip injury. He had illnesses, but he was also overworked. And you saw his game fall pretty dramatically from where it was early in the season. Lo and behold, he gets a bit of rest, and he has a pretty stellar performance against an Avalanche team who's still got some pieces despite missing a guy like Nathan McKinnon. You listen to Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every damn day. Let's wrap up by hearing from you, my favorite people, the listeners. G. Ellis in the comments saying, even at $8 million and getting 30 goals at a Brock a year, he doesn't drive play. No thanks. DeBrusk is better value. Look, DeBrusk is at better value than Brock Boeser. I think Brock Boeser, in fact, I know Brock Boeser is a better player than Jake DeBrusk. I don't think Jake DeBrusk has 40 goal potential. And Brock Boeser just does more around the ice. I think Brock Boeser does more of the little things you don't realize. He's got good defensive IQ. He's rarely out of position. Jake DeBrusk just seems to be floating a lot of the time. I don't think Brock Boeser's floating. He just kind of lacks the foot speed. But that being said, Brock at 8 versus Jake DeBrusk at 5.5. Yeah, it's hard to argue, GLS, that you're not right. Brock Boeser, or Jake DeBrusk, I should say, is better value than Brock Boeser. Sethos Elkin in the comments. Is it Sethos or Sethos, buddy? Let me know. $8 million until age 36. That's not a good contract for your Vancouver Canucks. I fully get the Vancouver Canucks not wanting to go beyond 5 years with Brock Boeser. Paying him from the ages of 28 to 33, it makes a lot more sense than paying this guy to age 36, especially a guy like Brock Boeser who does lack the foot speed. What the Canucks should have done with Brock Boeser is trade him at the deadline. That is the cold, hard truth. Now, there's still a value in the player. I'd be interested in him and having him back in the deal, paying him $5 million. $5 million would be great. 5 years at $40 million. But it's clear he wants more. He's deserved the right to go chase more in free agency. I get him not wanting to leave the Vancouver Canucks, but hey, there's an offer out there if you want to stay in Vancouver. It doesn't have to be all about the money. If you truly want to stay in Vancouver, take the contract, buddy. Alex Burrows did it here. Brock Boeser, you can also stay in Vancouver if you want to. Oh my God, Blake Snake Stare in the comments saying, I hope they're letting Boeser walk because they're expecting Bedard to sign. Hey, Clear the decks, baby. Clear the decks for Connor Bedard. Man, oh man, it'll only cost the Canucks. Again, offer sheets seem like they may be more the rage nowadays, as after the St. Louis Blues experiment with Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg paid off. Yeah, maybe the Canucks will give up 4 first-rounders and give Bedard, $57 million a season. Bring the hometown boy home who wants to play for the Vancouver Canucks. I agree with you, Blake. I don't think it's happening, but I hope they let investor walk because they got someone in the works for Connor Bedard. Let's go. Japan in the comments saying, I'd rather pay Nick Ehlers the same amount or pay more than have Boeser. And look, the Nick Ehlers, Brock Boeser argument is an interesting one. Nikolai Ehlers, much like Brock Boeser, he's battled his own injury issues. But he's more of a playmaker than a shooter. He's speedier than Brock Boeser. I have a hard time arguing with that one. But Nikolai Ehlers also isn't like miles ahead of Brock Boeser. So let's not kid ourselves that you let Brock Boeser walk and you bring in Nikolai Ehlers and this team is all of a sudden just miles better. They are comparable players at the end of the day. Brock Boeser has outscored Nikolai Ehlers in his NHL career so far. So, yeah, it's not like Nikolai Ehlers is just some magic tonic for this hockey team moving forward. And honestly, there's going to be a lot of other teams searching for Nikolai Ehlers' services as well. More reports that he also would prefer to play in the States. I mean, no love for Canada anymore, man. What's going on? Man, oh, man. Poor Canada, man. Unbelievable. I'm trying to look here about some stats about Nikolai Ehlers versus Brock Boeser over the past 3 seasons. But, yeah, I would agree. I would probably rather have Nikolai Ehlers here than Brock Boeser. But, again, there's not much between the two players. So if you want to look at their even strength scoring over the past 3 seasons, and this one tips heavily in Nikolai Ehlers' favor, actually. So here's the numbers. Nikolai Ehlers, in terms of total points per 60 at even strength, 2.47. So a bona fide first-line level. Brock Boeser at 1.87. Despite the 40 goals last year, that is about a high-end second-line level. So credit to you, Japan. I'm giving you the round of applause, buddy. Making me look like an idiot here on Locked On Canucks. Nikolai Ehlers, clearly way better than Brock Boeser. Man, oh man. We'll see though. I mean, I don't know if I want to tie the whole European to European thing together, Patrik Allvin, Nikolai Ehlers. But look, I could certainly see the Canucks being interested in Nikolai Ehlers this offseason. Yeah, I mean, you could look at some of the knocks him in Winnipeg. I think there's 2 big ones. The fact that he hasn't found serious chemistry with anyone on that team, despite spending his whole career there like Boeser. And the fact that he's been injured a lot, right? Those are the 2 big knocks against Nikolai Ehlers. And there's also an argument that, do you want another guy who's been banged up? Who's going to slot into your top 6? When this team already has guys like Philip Hedl, who they paid a premium for and may never play again. Tough decisions for the Vancouver Canucks. We're going to discuss all the potential answers here on Locked On Canucks. But for now, I got to get the hell out of here. If you've been, come on, I appreciate all of you, man. We're not here without you and you tuning in here on Locked On Canucks. Everyone from the everydayers to the first-time listeners. If you like what we're doing, go subscribe and like on YouTube. Help change a life on the podcast. I go follow and leave a 5-star review so I can make my family proud. Let's go, baby. The Vancouver Canucks do play the Minnesota Wild on Saturday. Is a postcast coming? Who knows? But I know that you're going to hear from me pretty damn soon here on Locked On Canucks. I'm Trevor Beggs, and you've been listening to this program called Locked On Canucks.
You're Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.